I'm Amanda Mitchell, 34, and I still remember the exact moment my marriage shattered like fine crystal on marble floors. It wasn't when I discovered the affair, or when he drained our joint account. No, it was at the Waldorf Astoria, surrounded by his colleagues, champagne flowing, when James publicly mocked our marriage as his biggest mistake, while I sat 3 seats away. The laughter still echoes in my nightmares. I left that night with nothing but my purse and dignity. 5 years later, his company is filing for bankruptcy, while mine just hit 8 figures. Sometimes karma needs a little push. If you've ever experienced that gut-wrenching moment when someone you trusted betrays you in the most public way possible, you'll understand what I went through. I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if this story resonates with you. Hit that like button if you've ever walked away from a toxic situation, and subscribe to see more stories about turning pain into power. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My parents immigrated to America with nothing but $200 and dreams of a better life for their children. Growing up, I watched them work multiple jobs. My mother cleaning houses during the day and waitressing at night, my father driving cabs and later starting a small grocery store. They instilled in me a fierce work ethic and the belief that education was the key to a better future. I studied relentlessly through high school, earning a full scholarship to Wharton Business School, where I graduated in the top 5% of my class. That's where I met James Reynolds during my final year. Unlike me, James came from old money and connections. His father was a partner at one of New York's most prestigious investment firms, and James carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who'd never known financial insecurity. He was charming, devastatingly handsome, and when he focused his attention on you, it felt like being bathed in sunlight. Our romance was a whirlwind. Looking back, I can see how I was swept away by the fantasy of it all. James would surprise me with weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, impromptu dinners at exclusive restaurants, and thoughtful gifts that showed he was listening to my dreams. Or so I thought. "You're brilliant, Amanda," he'd say. "With your brain and my connections, we could take over the financial world together." The first red flag appeared during a dinner with his parents at their Southampton estate. I'd enthusiastically shared my ideas about ethical investment platforms focusing on underserved communities. James's father nodded politely, but later that night, James gently suggested I might want to tone down the idealism around his family. "They're old school, babe. They don't get all that social responsibility stuff," he explained, kissing my forehead like I was a child who needed guidance. "Just focus on the profit margins when you talk business with them." I convinced myself he was just helping me navigate his world. More red flags followed. The way he'd subtly critique my outfit choices before important events, how he'd interrupt me during conversations with his colleagues to clarify my points, the dismissive chuckle when I talked about starting my own company someday. "You don't need to work that hard, Amanda," he'd say. "When we're married, you can do some charity work if you're bored." That's what most of the wives do. Despite my parents' concerns about the speed of our relationship, we were engaged within 8 months. My parents spent their life savings to give us a beautiful wedding, wanting their only daughter to have the celebration they never could. James later mocked their efforts, calling it charmingly provincial to his friends when he thought I couldn't hear. After the wedding, James's career at Morgan Financial took off. An opportunity for advancement came up in Chicago, and without much discussion, it was decided we would move. I gave up my promising position at a boutique investment firm in New York, leaving behind the professional network I'd worked so hard to build. "It's temporary," James assured me. "Once I make managing director, we can talk about your career again." In Chicago, we purchased a luxury condo in Lincoln Park with James's family money. I tried finding comparable work, but discovered that doors mysteriously closed when I mentioned my name. I later learned that James had told colleagues I was taking time off to focus on starting a family. Instead of confronting him directly, I began developing my business idea in secret. During the day, I maintained the facade of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, attending charity galas, and networking on James's behalf. At night, while he worked late, or so he claimed. I researched market gaps in the financial industry and drafted business plans. As James climbed the corporate ladder, his demeanor toward me changed dramatically. The man who once looked at me with admiration now seemed to look through me. In public, he would put his arm around me possessively, but the moment we entered our home, he'd retreat to his office or head out for client meetings that stretched until the early morning. Our intimacy dwindled until it was non-existent. When I tried to discuss it, James blamed work stress or subtly suggested I wasn't making enough effort to remain attractive to him. I began to question myself, wondering if I was being unreasonable or if the problem really was with me. To the outside world, we were the perfect power couple. James's Instagram was filled with carefully curated photos of us at glamorous events, vacation spots, and charity functions. The captions spoke of his brilliant and beautiful wife and how lucky he was. The contrast between this public image and our private reality became increasingly painful. By our 5th anniversary, I was a shadow of the confident, ambitious woman James had met at Wharton. But deep inside, a spark remained, a determination to reclaim my identity and purpose. That spark would soon become a flame, ignited by the very man who had tried to extinguish it. The invitation to the Morgan Financial Annual Partners Dinner arrived with James's handwritten note. Wear the blue Valentino. It photographs better. No pleas or discussion, just another directive. The event was being held at the Waldorf Astoria, and for the first time in years, I felt a flutter of excitement. Several potential investors I'd researched for my secret business plan would be in attendance. I saw it as an opportunity to discreetly network without James realizing my intentions. I spent hours preparing that evening, applying my makeup carefully and styling my hair into an elegant updo. The blue Valentino dress fit perfectly, though I hadn't worn it since James had selected it for me last Christmas. When I emerged from our bedroom, I caught a rare glimpse of appreciation in his eyes before it quickly disappeared behind his usual mask of indifference. The car will be here in 5, he said, returning his attention to his phone. Morton's bringing his wife tonight. She's a former model, so try to keep up. The backhanded comment stung, but I was determined not to let him ruin the evening before it began. In the car, I attempted to discuss the dinner seating arrangement, hoping to position myself near Bailey Roberts, a venture capitalist known for supporting women-led startups. Don't worry about the seating, James said dismissively. Just smile and be charming with whoever you're placed next to. And remember, no shop talk unless someone specifically asks about your background. The Waldorf was transformed for the evening, with crystal chandeliers reflecting off marble floors and tables adorned with arrangements of white orchids and roses. As we entered, James was immediately surrounded by colleagues, his hand slipping from my lower back as he stepped forward to greet the CEO. I stood awkwardly for a moment before putting on my social smile and moving through the crowd. Several wives I recognized from previous events nodded politely but kept their distance. I'd never been fully accepted into their circle, perhaps because they sensed I didn't belong or because James had said something to ensure I remained isolated. When it was time to be seated, I discovered I was placed at the far end of the table, separated from James by 6 people. He sat near the CEO and other partners, while I was sandwiched between a junior analyst's girlfriend and an elderly board member who was hard of hearing. Bailey Roberts, my networking target, was seated directly beside James. Throughout the appetizer and main course, I maintained pleasant conversation while keeping one ear tuned to the discussion happening at James's end of the table. The CEO was asking each partner about their greatest successes and challenges, both professional and personal. When it was James's turn, he spoke eloquently about his recent acquisition deal before the CEO asked, "And on the personal front, James? You and Amanda recently celebrated your 5th anniversary, correct?" I tensed, waiting for his response, hoping for at least a perfunctory acknowledgement of our marriage. "Yes," James replied, his voice carrying clearly down the table. 5 years of marriage, probably the biggest risk I've taken in my life. There were a few polite chuckles, but James wasn't finished. "In finance, We talk about sunk cost fallacy, continuing to invest in something failing because you've already put so much into it. He took a sip of his champagne, his eyes briefly meeting mine before continuing. Marriage is like that sometimes. Mine has been my biggest mistake, a bad investment I'm still trying to optimize returns on. The laughter that followed was uncomfortable, but it was the look of pity on Bailey Roberts' face that cut deepest. She glanced in my direction with unmistakable sympathy before turning back to James, who was now fully enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Amanda had some cute ideas about ethical investing in college, he continued. But I've managed to keep her occupied with charity lunches instead. Much less risk to my capital. More laughter. Louder this time. I sat frozen, my fork suspended above my barely touched salmon. The elderly gentleman beside me patted my hand, mistaking my silence for shyness rather than devastation. James noticed my reaction and, instead of stopping, raised his glass in a mock toast in my direction. To my beautiful wife, who's been an excellent corporate accessory these past 5 years. In that moment, something inside me shattered and something else crystallized. With mechanical precision, I placed my napkin beside my plate, gathered my clutch, and stood up. Without a word, I walked calmly toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Behind me, I heard James's voice call out, "Women, am I right?" So emotional, followed by another round of laughter. The coat check attendant retrieved my wrap, his eyes kind as he helped me into it. "Would you like me to call you a car, ma'am?" "Yes, please," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And not to Lincoln Park. Take me to the Drake Hotel instead." In the taxi, I made 2 calls, one to cancel our joint credit cards and another to book a room for the night. Then I returned to our condo while James was still at the dinner. I gathered only what I absolutely needed: my passport, birth certificate, personal laptop, and a few irreplaceable family photos. I left my wedding ring on his pillow with a note that contained just one word: goodbye. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from James. "Stop being dramatic. You're embarrassing yourself. Come back to the dinner now." "Fine, sulk at home. We'll discuss your behavior tomorrow." By midnight, his tone had changed. "Where are you? You're overreacting. This little stunt will have consequences, Amanda." I turned off my phone and sat in my hotel room, staring out at Lake Michigan. For the first time in years, despite the pain and uncertainty, I felt something that had been missing for too long. Freedom. The freedom I felt that first night in the Drake Hotel was short-lived. I awoke to discover James had frozen our joint accounts, leaving me with only the cash in my wallet and whatever credit was left on my personal card, which wasn't much, as James had insisted on managing our finances more efficiently by putting most expenses on joint cards that he controlled. My first call was to Sarah, my best friend from college who had warned me about James years ago. Our friendship had faded after I chose James over her concerns, but I hoped she might offer temporary shelter while I sorted things out. "Amanda, I'm so sorry," she said, genuine remorse in her voice. "But James already called. He said you were having some mental health issues and might reach out with wild stories. He said your doctors advised against enabling you." I didn't know what to believe. One by one, I called friends and acquaintances, discovering that James had methodically poisoned every well. To some, he'd portrayed me as mentally unstable. To others, as an ungrateful wife, abandoning him during an important career phase. A few didn't even pick up, having already chosen sides. With my savings inaccessible and my credit cards canceled, I found myself in a situation I hadn't experienced since college, nearly broke. I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, paying 2 months' rent upfront with the remaining balance on my personal credit card. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette that consisted of a mini fridge, a 2-burner stove, and a sink that leaked constantly. The bathroom had mold in the corners that no amount of bleach seemed to kill, and the neighbors fought loudly at all hours. Finding work proved even more challenging than finding housing. Despite my impressive resume Wharton degree, early career success in New York, I kept encountering closed doors. During one interview that seemed to be going well, the hiring manager received a phone call, returned looking uncomfortable, and abruptly ended our meeting. Later, I learned from a sympathetic receptionist that James had called, describing me as erratic and vindictive following our separation. I finally found work as an administrative assistant at a struggling graphic design company, earning barely enough to cover rent and basic necessities. To make ends meet, I took a second job waiting tables at a diner on weekends. I worked 70-hour weeks, coming home too exhausted to do much more than shower and collapse into bed. My meals consisted largely of ramen noodles supplemented with eggs for protein, and coffee became both breakfast and a means to stay alert during double shifts. The divorce proceedings were another arena for James's cruelty. He hired Kathleen Fisher, a notorious divorce attorney, known for her aggressive tactics, while I was represented by a fresh-faced lawyer from a legal aid clinic who was clearly overwhelmed by Fisher's ruthlessness. James claimed I had abandoned the marriage without cause, demanded I pay his legal fees, and even tried to claim ownership of my personal laptop containing my business plans. During one particularly brutal deposition, James's attorney questioned me for hours about my emotional instability and professional jealousy of James, bringing up private conversations that I'd shared only with James during our marriage. I realized he had been collecting ammunition against me for years, perhaps anticipating this very scenario. The loneliness was perhaps the hardest part. I'd always been surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues, but now found myself profoundly isolated. My parents, living overseas to care for my ailing grandmother, couldn't understand the full situation from our brief, expensive international calls. I couldn't bear to tell them how badly I was struggling or how foolish I felt for ignoring their initial concerns about James. 3 months into my new reality, I developed persistent chest pains and dizziness that I initially attributed to stress and poor nutrition. When I finally fainted at work and was taken to the emergency room, the doctor diagnosed extreme exhaustion and malnutrition. Unable to afford the hospital bill, I signed a payment plan I knew I couldn't maintain and was released with instructions to rest and reduce stress advice that seemed cruelly impossible given my circumstances. One rainy Tuesday evening, I hit rock bottom. My second job had cut my hours, my apartment ceiling was leaking, and I'd received notice that James was countersuing for emotional damages. I sat on my threadbare futon, staring at my laptop screen where my business plan document was open. The dream I'd nurtured in secret during my marriage now seemed absurdly naive. Who was I to think I could build a company from nothing, especially with James actively working against me? I moved my cursor to delete the file, tears streaming down my face. Just as I was about to click, my phone rang with an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, assuming it was another debt collector, but something made me answer. "Is this Amanda Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Natalie from Morgan Financial HR. I'm not supposed to be calling you, but I thought you should know. James has been sabotaging your job applications. He's been telling people you're being investigated for fraud." The revelation stunned me into silence. "I'm risking my job by telling you this," Natalie continued, "but what he's doing is wrong. Several of us have seen how he operates up close. And, let's just say you're not the only one he's hurt." That call connected me with 3 former colleagues who'd also been burned by James's manipulative tactics. They couldn't offer financial help, but they provided something equally valuable: information, support, and validation that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. The next day, still reeling from this new information, I literally bumped into Rachel Chen, founder of Horizon Capital, while serving her table at the diner. I apologized profusely for spilling water on her designer blazer, and something about my frantic apologies made her look at me more closely. "You look familiar," she said, studying my face. "Have we met before?" Exhausted and at my breaking point, I blurted out, "Wharton, class of 2013. I was Amanda Mitchell then. Now I'm just surviving." Recognition dawned in her eyes. You graduated top of our finance class. What are you doing waiting tables? Before I could stop myself, my entire story came pouring out. Rachel listened without interruption, ordered a coffee to extend our conversation, and then handed me her business card. Come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late, and bring your business plan. That night, I stared at my whiteboard where I'd started tracking James's company's stock price and noted its recent decline following rumors of regulatory scrutiny. Next to it, I wrote in bold letters, 5. Year plan to succeed, not just survive. For the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. Rachel's office at Horizon Capital was everything my apartment wasn't. Spacious, immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I arrived 15 minutes early, my business plan printed and bound at Kinko's, using money I couldn't afford to spend. Your idea has merit, Rachel said after reviewing my plan for an hour. An ethical investment platform focused on women-owned businesses is something the market needs. But your financial projections are too conservative, and your marketing strategy needs work. My heart sank until she continued. I'm not going to invest in this, yet. But I will give you a consulting project. Fix the issues I've outlined, expand the market analysis section, and I'll pay you for your work. Consider it an audition. For the next 3 weeks, I worked on Rachel's project during every free moment, early mornings before my assistant job, late nights after my shifts at the diner, and entire weekends hunched over my laptop. I researched until my eyes burned, revised until my fingers cramped, and pushed myself beyond exhaustion. When I presented my revised plan, Rachel nodded approvingly. You've got the skills and the drive. Now you need to build something real. I'll connect you with some people, but most of this journey you'll have to walk yourself. With Rachel's modest consulting payment, I invested in a professional website domain, business cards, and a better suit for meetings. I continued working both jobs while developing my platform concept at night, teaching myself basic coding through free online courses to build a prototype without hiring expensive developers. The rejection began immediately. Investor after investor turned me down, many not even bothering to look at my presentation. Too risky, said some. Market too niche, said others. The most honest simply stated, I know James Reynolds. I'm not getting involved in whatever this is. After my 27th rejection, I sat in a coffee shop, fighting back tears of frustration. The barista, noticing my distress, brought me a free refill. Bad day? She asked. Bad quarter, I replied with a weak smile. I'm trying to start a business, but no one will take a chance on me. My aunt might, she said, surprising me. She inherited money from my grandfather and is always talking about supporting women in business. Want her email? The barista's aunt, Diane Hartford, turned out to be a retired school teacher with a modest inheritance and a passionate belief in women helping women. After 3 meetings over pie at a local diner, she became my first investor with $50,000, a fraction of what I'd hoped for, but enough to officially incorporate Ethica Fund and rent a small office space that was actually a converted garage behind a friend's house. If you've been following my story and know what it's like to rebuild after everything falls apart, drop a comment about your own experience. There's something powerful about knowing we're not alone in these struggles. I read every comment and find so much strength in this community. Now, let me share how I built my company from that tiny garage office. With Diane's investment, I could finally leave my assistant job, though I kept the diner position for steady income. I assembled a small team of other talented underdogs. Lisa, a brilliant coder who'd been passed over for promotion repeatedly at a major tech company because she wasn't a culture fit, code for being a woman over 40. Miguel, a finance whiz whose accent had been mocked in interviews despite his Stanford MBA. And Tara, a marketing specialist returning to work after being told her maternity leave made her uncommitted to her career. We worked from the garage office, sharing a single bathroom and taking turns making coffee on a hot plate. In the beginning, we couldn't afford proper desks, so we used doors laid across sawhorses. The winter was brutal, with space heaters that constantly blew fuses, and the summer brought stifling heat that had us working in shorts and tank tops with fans blasting. Building the platform was a technical nightmare. None of us were experienced developers, so we learned as we went, often coding until 2 a.m., only to discover critical errors that required starting sections from scratch. We couldn't afford high-end servers, so we experienced crashes during demos with potential clients. During one particularly important presentation, our entire system went down, and I had to finish the pitch using hand-drawn diagrams while Lisa frantically worked to get us back online. These setbacks were discouraging, but with each obstacle, our determination grew stronger. We were all people who had been underestimated and dismissed, and that shared experience created a bond and resilience that money couldn't buy. Our breakthrough came 6 months in, when we successfully facilitated our first investment through the platform, $25,000, to a woman-owned sustainable fashion startup. The 3% commission barely covered our operating costs for the week, but it proved our concept worked. We celebrated with cheap champagne in plastic cups, taking a rare evening off from coding and cold calling. Word began to spread through women's business networks about our platform, which not only connected entrepreneurs with investors, but provided resources, mentorship, and community support that traditional investment platforms lacked. We focused exclusively on businesses with ethical practices and diverse leadership, creating a niche that larger, established platforms overlooked. As our user base grew, so did our visibility. A popular business podcast featured one of our successful client pairs, a female investor who had funded an innovative medical device created by a woman of color, and mentioned Ethica Fund as the platform that connected them. The resulting traffic crashed our servers again, but this time it was a problem we were happy to have. A crucial turning point came when Lena Washington, a prominent tech entrepreneur with millions of social media followers, mentioned Ethica Fund during a televised interview about women in finance. "There's this incredible platform called Ethica Fund that's changing the game," she said. "It's run by women who understand the unique challenges we face in getting funded." Overnight, our user registrations increased by 800%. We were overwhelmed but exhilarated. Rachel Chen stepped in with emergency funding to help us upgrade our infrastructure and hire 2 additional developers. We moved from the garage to a small but proper office in a co-working space, though we kept our door desks as a reminder of where we started. Not everything was smooth sailing. As we gained traction, we also attracted attention from competitors, including Morgan Financial. James's division launched a hastily created women's investment initiative that mimicked many of our features, but with the backing of a major financial institution. When a business reporter asked me for comment, I resisted the urge to trash James and instead focused on our unique value proposition. "We're not just a platform, we're a community," I explained. "Our team has lived the challenges our users face." That perspective informs everything we do in ways that can't be replicated by traditional institutions jumping on a trend. My measured response earned respect in the industry and contrasted sharply with James's dismissive comments about amateur startups with cute social missions but no real business acumen. Our first major crisis came when a business we'd helped fund was exposed for labor violations overseas, exactly the type of ethical problem our platform was supposed to screen out. The press was brutal. Investors questioned our due diligence process, and users began withdrawing from the platform. In an emergency team meeting that lasted until dawn, we faced a critical decision: downplay the situation to protect our reputation or take radical transparency approach that might sink us. Against the advice of our newly hired PR consultant, I chose transparency. We published a comprehensive statement acknowledging our failure, immediately removed the company from our platform, and most importantly, completely overhauled our vetting process. We developed an innovative ethical supply chain verification system that became our signature approach, a thorough, multi-step process that went far beyond industry standards to verify companies' claims about their practices. What could have destroyed us instead became our strongest selling point. Investors and entrepreneurs alike appreciated our integrity and commitment to our values, even when it cost us in the short term. 3 months after the crisis, our user numbers had not only recovered but grown, and investments through the platform hit $1 million for the first time. On the 1-year anniversary of Ethica Fund's launch, I received an unexpected email from a major business magazine requesting an interview for their Disruptors to Watch feature. The journalist was particularly interested in my journey from corporate wife to founder. I agreed to the interview, but insisted it focus primarily on the platform's mission rather than my personal story. When the article came out with the headline, "From Waldorf Walkout to Wall Street Wonder: How Amanda Mitchell is Redefining Ethical Investment," I realized my personal journey and professional mission had become inextricably linked. The article included a small photo of James and me from our marriage, captioned, "Mitchell left a privileged life behind to build something meaningful." It wasn't the angle I'd wanted, but the publicity brought a new wave of users and investors to the platform. That night, sitting in my new apartment, still modest but with functioning plumbing and no mold, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. We were far from the finish line, but for the first time, I could see it in the distance. Looking at the latest numbers, I realized something both surprising and gratifying. I was no longer building this company to prove James wrong. I was building it because it mattered. Ethica Fund hit the $1 million investment milestone faster than projected in our business plan. Within the next 6 months, that figure quintupled as more women-owned businesses and ethical investors discovered our platform. The tiny team that had started in a converted garage expanded to 15 employees, necessitating a move to a real office in downtown Chicago. Our new headquarters was nothing fancy. An open floor plan in a renovated industrial building with exposed brick and ductwork. But it was legitimate, professional, and most importantly, ours. We maintained our startup culture, keeping the door desks for our founding team members as a reminder of our journey, while adding proper workstations for new hires. The day we signed the lease, I stood alone in the empty space after everyone had left, thinking about how far we'd come. Just 18 months earlier, I had been serving coffee and living on ramen, my ambitious dreams seeming like delusions. Now those same dreams were materializing into something tangible and impactful. As Ethica Fund grew, I maintained a careful distance from anything involving James or Morgan Financial. I instructed our team never to directly target his clients or publicly criticize his company, no matter how tempting the opportunity. "We build our own success, we don't tear down others," became our unofficial motto. This approach served us well, especially as rumors began circulating about Morgan Financial's ethical corners being cut under increasing pressure to perform. Their hasty women's initiative, launched to compete with us, was floundering due to lack of authentic commitment and understanding of the market. The first industry recognition came when Ethica Fund won the Financial Innovation Award at a prestigious business conference. Standing on stage accepting the glass trophy, I scanned the audience and spotted several faces from that fateful dinner at the Waldorf, including Bailey Roberts, the investor I'd hoped to connect with that night. "Your platform is addressing a critical gap in the market," Bailey told me afterward, handing me her card. "I'd like to discuss potential collaboration opportunities." That meeting led to Bailey becoming one of our largest investors and a valuable mentor. With her guidance, we acquired a complementary business, a financial education platform focused on women and minorities that expanded our offerings beyond just facilitating investments. Throughout this period, I maintained a policy of never speaking publicly about James or our failed marriage, despite numerous reporters fishing for gossip. When directly asked about Morgan Financial's similar initiative during interviews, I would simply say, "The market is large enough for multiple platforms serving this demographic. We focus on our unique approach rather than competition." James, however, didn't exercise the same restraint. In a business magazine profile, he dismissed Ethica Fund as a niche platform riding the diversity trend that will fade when investors demand real returns. The comment backfired when our quarterly report, released the following week, showed returns exceeding market averages across all our investment categories. The contrast between our approaches didn't go unnoticed in financial circles. James had always been known for his cutthroat tactics, but as pressure mounted on Morgan Financial to perform, his methods grew increasingly questionable. Whispers of regulatory violations, manipulated data, and hostile workplace conditions began to surface. 18 months into Ethica Fund's operation, I received an email from Thomas Barrington, a senior investment manager at Morgan Financial and one of James's most trusted lieutenants. He requested a discreet meeting away from both our offices. "I've been watching what you've built," Thomas said, when we met at a quiet cafe in a neighborhood far from the financial district. "It's impressive, especially considering the obstacles James put in your way." Thomas revealed that he was considering leaving Morgan Financial, along with several of his colleagues, due to concerns about the company's practices and James's increasingly erratic leadership. "There are investigations underway that haven't hit the press yet," he confided. "Regulatory bodies are looking into several deals from the past year. James is cutting corners that shouldn't be cut." While I appreciated Thomas's candor, I maintained my policy of separation. "I can't discuss anything related to James or actively recruit from Morgan Financial," I explained. "But Ethica Fund has a public application process for all positions, and we evaluate each candidate on their merits." 2 weeks later, Thomas submitted his resignation to Morgan Financial and applied to Ethica Fund, bringing his considerable expertise and client relationships. His departure triggered an exodus. 3 more senior managers and several mid-level employees followed suit in the coming months. The financial press took notice. "Morgan Financial bleeding talent as Ethica Fund rises," read one headline. Another asked, "Is James Reynolds losing his golden touch?" The articles carefully avoided direct accusations, but painted a picture of a company in decline and a leader losing control. As the industry whispers about Morgan Financial grew louder, Ethica Fund continued its steady ascent. We reached $50 million in facilitated investments during our second year, a figure that would have seemed impossible during those early days in the garage. Our team expanded to 30 employees, and we launched a mobile app that increased user engagement by 40%. The most surprising development came when James reached out directly for the first time since our divorce. His email arrived late one evening, as I was working alone in the office. "Amanda, we should talk. There's potential for synergy between our platforms that could benefit us both. Besides, it's been a long time. Perhaps we can put the past behind us? Dinner next week?" The message triggered a flood of emotions: anger, vindication, curiosity, and a trace of the old pain. I took a day to consider my response before replying. "James, I appreciate your outreach, but I must decline. Ethica Fund remains committed to its independent path and mission. I wish you well professionally and personally." His response came within minutes. "Still stubborn, I see. Your loss financially and otherwise." I didn't dignify it with a reply, but saved the exchange. Something in his tone suggested desperation rather than confidence, and my instincts proved correct when the news broke a month later. Morgan Financial was under formal investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for alleged misrepresentation to investors and questionable accounting practices. Morgan Financial's stock plummeted 30% in a single day. James made a disastrous appearance on a financial news program, appearing disheveled and combative, denying all allegations while blaming regulatory overreach and competitors spreading rumors, a thinly veiled reference to Ethica Fund, though we had been careful to never comment on their troubles. As Morgan Financial imploded, investment firms began looking for alternative platforms focused on ethical investments, and Ethica Fund was positioned perfectly to capture that market share. Our platform experienced an influx of both investors and businesses seeking funding, pushing us past $100 million in facilitated investments by the end of our second year. During this period of explosive growth, I received a surprising invitation to speak at a prestigious financial conference, the same conference where James had been a featured speaker for the past 5 years. The organizer apologetically explained that James would not be participating this year due to scheduling conflicts, though everyone understood the real reason. Standing at the podium where James had once proclaimed his investment philosophy, I spoke not about him or Morgan Financial's troubles, but about the future of ethical investment and the untapped potential of underserved markets. The standing ovation that followed confirmed what the numbers already showed. Ethica Fund had surpassed Morgan Financial not just in reputation but in market relevance. That evening, checking the financial news before bed, I saw the headline that represented a milestone I had never explicitly sought, but couldn't help noting. Ethica Fund valuation surpasses Morgan Financial for first time. Attached was a graph showing our trajectories, Ethica Fund's steady rise intersecting with Morgan Financial's sharp decline. It was visual confirmation of something I had known intuitively. Success wasn't about destroying James. It was about building something better. While Ethica Fund flourished, my personal life remained largely on hold. I had thrown myself so completely into building the company that I'd neglected other aspects of my life. 18-hour workdays left little time for socializing, dating, or even basic self-care. My apartment, though no longer moldy, was sparsely furnished and showed little evidence of the person living there beyond a collection of business books and a neglected plant struggling to survive. At Rachel's persistent urging, I finally began seeing a therapist, Dr. Samantha Reed, who specialized in helping people recover from emotionally abusive relationships. Our weekly sessions became the 1 hour I allowed myself to focus solely on my personal healing rather than business concerns. "You've built an impressive company," Dr. Reed observed during one session. "But what are you building for yourself, Amanda?" The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on proving my professional worth that I hadn't considered my personal reconstruction as equally important work. "When was the last time you spoke with your parents?" she asked. I realized with shame that our communication had dwindled to brief monthly calls where I carefully curated my experiences, sharing only successes and glossing over struggles. That evening, I called them and had the first honest conversation we'd shared in years, finally telling them about the humiliation at the Waldorf, the poverty that followed, and the painful rebuilding process. "Oh, Amanda," my mother said, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell us? We would have helped you." I was ashamed, I admitted. I felt like such a failure for not seeing who James really was, especially after you tried to warn me. "Failing doesn't make you a failure," my father said gently. "It makes you human, and what you've built from those ashes makes us prouder than you could ever know." That conversation began a healing process not just between me and my parents, but within myself. I realized how much of my self-worth I had tied to professional success, using Ethica Fund's growth as the sole measure of my value. With Dr. Reed's guidance, I began rebuilding other neglected relationships. I reconnected with Sarah, my college friend, who had initially turned me away after James's manipulations. Our reconciliation was awkward at first, but ultimately strengthening. Sarah later confessed how James had systematically isolated me, even telling mutual friends I'd made disparaging comments about them. "He was always planting little seeds of doubt," she explained. "By the time you left him, he had constructed this whole narrative where you were unstable and ungrateful. I'm so sorry I believed it, even for a moment." As I healed, I also recognized my responsibility to help others. I established a mentorship program at Ethica Fund, specifically designed for women recovering from career setbacks or personal hardships. The program provided not just professional guidance but resources for holistic recovery, including therapy sessions, financial planning, and community support. During this period, I found my voice as a public speaker, initially giving talks at small business gatherings, but eventually accepting invitations to larger conferences. Rather than focusing solely on Ethica Fund's success, I spoke candidly about failure, resilience, and the importance of ethical leadership in business. My TED Talk, Phoenix Principles, rising from professional ashes, garnered over 2 million views in its first month online. The speaking engagements brought unexpected personal connections as well. After a panel discussion on ethical business practices in San Francisco, I was approached by Michael Donovan, founder of Green Tech Solutions, a sustainable energy startup. Your points about long-term sustainability over short-term gains really resonated with me, he said, handing me his card. I'd love to continue the conversation over coffee sometime. Michael was unlike anyone I'd dated before, thoughtful rather than flashy, curious rather than presumptuous. On our first date, he asked questions about my ideas and actually listened to the answers. When I mentioned Ethica Fund's challenges, he offered suggestions rather than dismissals. Most refreshingly, he seemed genuinely comfortable with my success, never attempting to compete or diminish my achievements. Still, trust came slowly. I found myself analyzing his texts for hidden meanings and waiting for the mask to drop, revealing the controlling personality I feared lurked beneath his supportive exterior. When he complimented my business acumen, I braced for the subtle critique that would follow. It never came. "You've been hurt badly," Michael observed after I apologized for questioning his intentions yet again. "That's not something that heals overnight. I'm willing to earn your trust at whatever pace works for you." His patience gave me the space to work through my lingering trust issues. Unlike James, who had demanded center stage in my life, Michael respected my boundaries and understood that Ethica Fund would always be a priority. He had his own passion, sustainable energy solutions for developing countries, and we found common ground in our commitment to creating positive change through business. As our relationship developed, I established firm boundaries between my personal and professional lives, something I had failed to do with James. Michael never presumed to offer unsolicited advice about Ethica Fund, and I maintained financial independence despite our growing emotional connection. The contrast between my past and present relationships was never more apparent than during a business crisis that coincided with Michael and I reaching our 6-month milestone. When a critical server crash threatened a major investor presentation, I called to cancel our anniversary dinner. "I understand completely," he said without hesitation. "What can I do to help? Do you need me to bring food to the office for your team?" 2 hours later, he arrived with meals for everyone working late and set up in an empty conference room, handling his own work without disrupting ours. When the crisis was resolved at midnight, he was waiting with a thermos of tea and a listening ear, but no judgment about the changed plans. In the 3 years since leaving James, I had transformed not just professionally but personally. The woman who had once dimmed her light to avoid overshadowing her husband now spoke confidently in boardrooms and on stages. The financial dependence that had left me vulnerable had been replaced by careful stewardship of my resources and generous philanthropy where it mattered. Perhaps most significantly, I had developed a new philosophy about success and partnership, one based on collaboration rather than competition, authenticity rather than appearance, and mutual support rather than dominance. This philosophy extended beyond my relationship with Michael to all areas of my life. I founded a women's leadership retreat called Phoenix Rising, bringing together female professionals who had faced significant setbacks. The annual weekend event combined practical business workshops with holistic healing practices, creating a space where women could be both professionally ambitious and personally vulnerable. In a moment of reflection during the first retreat, watching 20 women who had been through their own versions of hell supporting each other's dreams, I realized something profound. The empire I had built wasn't just Ethica Fund. It was this community of resilience, this network of mutual support, this philosophy of ethical success. And unlike the hollow achievement James had pursued, this empire was built on a foundation that couldn't crumble at the first sign of trouble. It was an empire of integrity. 4 years after the night I walked out of the Waldorf Astoria, I received an invitation to the annual Financial Innovation Gala, an exclusive industry event honoring groundbreaking approaches in the financial sector. Ethica Fund had been nominated for the prestigious Vanguard Award for our ethical supply chain verification system, which had become the gold standard in the industry. As I reviewed the attendee list, a familiar name jumped out at me. James Reynolds, still hanging on as CEO of Morgan Financial despite the company's continuing struggles. This would be our first face-to-face encounter since our divorce, and despite my personal growth and professional success, I felt a flutter of anxiety. "You don't have to go," Michael said when I shared my concerns. "Your team could accept the award if you win." "No," I replied, finding resolve in his support. "I've earned my place in that room. I won't let his presence diminish that." The night of the gala, I chose a sleek midnight blue gown, not coincidentally, the exact opposite of the Valentino blue dress James had once instructed me to wear. Michael and I arrived fashionably late, making our entrance just as cocktail hour was in full swing. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel fell into a brief hush as we entered, followed by a surge of people moving in our direction. 4 years earlier, I had been a +1 at such events, expected to stand quietly while James worked the room. Now, influential investors, tech innovators, and financial journalists eagerly approached me while Michael graciously stepped back, supportive but never overshadowing. Across the room, I spotted James holding court with a much smaller circle than in his heyday. He looked older, the confidence in his posture replaced by a tension I recognized as fear disguised as arrogance. He was visibly startled when he noticed me, his champagne glass freezing halfway to his lips. I deliberately focused on my conversations, refusing to let his presence distract me from the connections and opportunities the evening presented. Throughout dinner, I was aware of his gaze repeatedly finding me from his table across the room, but I remained engaged with those around me, particularly Bailey Roberts, who was now a close friend and advisor, seated at my table. "James looks like he's seen a ghost," Bailey murmured. "A very successful, gorgeous ghost, who's now more powerful than he ever was." I smiled but refused to indulge in petty satisfaction. "Tonight isn't about him," I replied, turning the conversation to Bailey's recent philanthropic initiative. The confrontation I had both dreaded and secretly anticipated came during the dessert course. As I returned from a brief visit to the ladies' room, James intercepted me in a quiet corridor, away from the main ballroom. "Amanda," he said, his tone attempting the old charm that had once disarmed me. "You look wonderful. Success suits you." "Thank you, James," I replied neutrally. "Congratulations on your nomination." It was a generous statement. Morgan Financial's nomination was widely considered a courtesy nod to a once influential institution, rather than recognition of any recent innovation. "We should catch up properly," he continued, stepping closer. "For old time's sake. I've followed your rise, quite impressive for someone who started so unconventionally." The condescension in his tone was familiar, but it no longer had the power to diminish me. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full," I replied. "But I wish you well." I moved to step around him, but he shifted to block my path, his facade of charm slipping. "Come on, Amanda. We both know you built Ethica Fund as revenge against me. Mission accomplished. Now maybe we can be civilized again." Before I could respond, an event staff member approached with an urgent expression. "Miss Mitchell? There's been a development you should be aware of." The staff member discreetly showed me her tablet, where a breaking news alert was displayed. "SEC files formal charges against Morgan Financial for regulatory violations. CEO James Reynolds named in complaint." James's face drained of color as he glimpsed the headline. In that moment, the power dynamic between us shifted completely. No longer was he the successful executive condescending to his former wife. He was a man facing potential disgrace while I stood at the peak of my success. Rather than gloating, I felt an unexpected pang of pity. "I'm sorry to hear about this, James," I said quietly. "Truly." His charm vanished entirely, replaced by desperation. "This is all political, a witch hunt," he hissed. "They're making an example of me because of a few technical oversights. Amanda, you have connections now. A word from you about my character could help. I studied him, realizing he genuinely believed I had built my entire company as an elaborate revenge scheme, unable to conceive that I had simply pursued my own vision once freed from his shadow. My company wasn't built as revenge, James, I said firmly. It was built because I had ideas and values you dismissed. I won't speak ill of you to others, but I also won't vouch for your character when you're still trying to manipulate me. His expression hardened. You've become quite cold. Not the woman I married. No, I agreed. I've become the woman I was always meant to be before I let you convince me to be less. As we stood in tense silence, Michael appeared at the entrance to the corridor, his expression concerned but not intrusive. James glanced between us, comprehension dawning. I see you've replaced me with someone more accommodating, he remarked with a dismissive glance at Michael. I've partnered with someone who values me, I corrected him. There's a difference. Our confrontation was interrupted by the announcement that the awards ceremony was beginning. As I moved to leave, James grabbed my arm, not roughly, but with an urgency that surprised me. I was wrong, he said, the words seemingly pulled from him against his will. Mocking our marriage that night at the Waldorf, it was the biggest mistake of my life. Not just because of where we both ended up, but because it was cruel and untrue. You deserved better. The admission I had once desperately wanted now felt hollow, coming not from genuine remorse, but from a man facing professional ruin. Still, I acknowledged it with a nod. Thank you for saying that. As I rejoined Michael and we took our seats for the awards, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not because of James's belated admission, but because I realized I no longer needed it for closure. The validation I had once sought from him had been replaced by something far more valuable: self-validation and the respect of a community I had built through integrity and innovation. Throughout the awards ceremony, I noticed industry leaders who had once gravitated toward James now approaching me instead. Some offered congratulations on Ethica Fund's success, others probed for my reaction to Morgan Financial's troubles, and a few transparently sought to establish connections with the ascendant company in the field. When Ethica Fund won the Vanguard Award, I took the stage to thunderous applause. From the podium, I could see James slipping out of the ballroom, alone, as I began my acceptance speech. There was a time when this visual metaphor of our reversed fortunes would have felt like sweet vindication. Now it was simply the natural consequence of our different approaches to business and life. This award recognizes innovation, I said into the microphone, but I believe the truly revolutionary aspect of Ethica Fund isn't technological, it's philosophical. We've proven that ethics and profit aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're mutually reinforcing. As I concluded my speech to a standing ovation, I caught Michael's eye in the audience. His pride was evident, but more importantly, it was pride in me, not in what my success reflected on him. The contrast with James couldn't have been clearer. Later that night, as Michael and I celebrated privately with champagne on the balcony of our hotel suite overlooking Central Park, he asked, "How does it feel? Coming face to face with him after all this time?" I considered the question carefully. Like closing a book I've already finished reading, the story ended long ago tonight just confirmed it. As the city lights twinkled below us, I realized the empire I had built wasn't just financially successful, it was emotionally solvent as well. And that was the true victory. 5 years and 3 months after walking out of the Waldorf Astoria with nothing but my purse and dignity, I stood in my corner office overlooking Chicago's Magnificent Mile, watching the early morning light glint off Lake Michigan. On my desk lay the latest issue of Forbes with my photo on the cover and the headline, "The Ethics Empire: How Amanda Mitchell Revolutionized Investment and Reached Unicorn Status." The article detailed Ethica Fund's meteoric rise to a $1 billion valuation, highlighting our innovative approach to ethical investment and the platform's success in directing over $500 million to women-owned businesses that traditional finance had overlooked. What the article couldn't capture was the profound personal journey that had accompanied this professional ascent. Lisa knocked on my open door, excitement evident on her face. The new office plans just arrived for approval. Want to see the Tokyo location? Our expansion to international markets had been my focus for the past 6 months, bringing our ethical investment platform to regions where women entrepreneurs faced even steeper barriers than in the United States. The Tokyo office would be our third international location after London and Singapore. As Lisa spread the architectural renderings across my conference table, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Morgan Financial files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy following failed restructuring attempt. CEO James Reynolds steps down. I set my phone aside without commenting, focusing instead on Lisa's enthusiastic explanation of the sustainable materials being used in the Tokyo office construction. The news about James's company wasn't surprising. Morgan Financial had been in decline for years following the SEC investigation, with clients and talent steadily migrating to more ethical competitors, including Ethica Fund. Later that afternoon, my assistant Virginia brought in a letter that had been delivered by courier. "This came for you personally," she said, placing the cream-colored envelope on my desk. Security cleared it. The handwriting on the envelope was immediately recognizable, James's distinctive scrawl that I had once found so charming. For a moment, I considered tossing it unopened into the shredder, but curiosity won out. The letter was surprisingly humble, lacking the defensive tone of our last encounter. "Amanda, as you've likely heard, the company is filing for bankruptcy, and I'm stepping down. This isn't how I imagined my career would end, but perhaps it's the consequence I've earned. I've had a lot of time to reflect during these past difficult years. The night at the Waldorf wasn't just a tactical error that cost me my marriage and ultimately my company. It was a moral failure that revealed character flaws I'm only now beginning to address. You were right to leave. You were right to build something better. And though it's years too late to matter, I wanted you to know that I recognize now what I was too arrogant to see then. Your vision was always clearer than mine. I don't expect forgiveness or even a response. Consider this letter the closing of a chapter for both of us. With respect and regret, James." I refolded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, feeling neither triumph nor resentment, but a quiet acknowledgement that some cycles really do come full circle. Unlike James's earlier half-apology born of desperation, this message seemed genuinely reflective. That evening, I drafted a brief reply. "James, thank you for your letter. The journey has been difficult for both of us in different ways, but I hope you find peace and purpose in whatever comes next. Sometimes our greatest growth comes after our most painful failures. I wish you well, Amanda." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. Some bridges, once burned, can never be fully rebuilt, but it was something equally important: the release of the last vestiges of bitterness that served neither of us. The following week brought an unexpected email from Dean Elizabeth Montgomery of my alma mater, Wharton Business School, inviting me to deliver the commencement address to the graduating class. "Your journey from graduate to groundbreaking founder represents exactly the kind of ethical leadership we hope to inspire in our students," she wrote. Standing at the podium in the same auditorium where I had once sat as a student full of ambition but lacking confidence, I surveyed the sea of eager faces. How many of them, I wondered, would face their own versions of professional heartbreak and personal betrayal? How many would have to rebuild from ashes they never anticipated? "Success is rarely linear," I began. "The business plans you've carefully crafted, the 5-year goals you've set, life has a way of inserting unexpected plot twists. Your response to those moments will define you far more than your response to triumph." I shared my journey candidly, but without bitterness, emphasizing the lessons rather than the pain. As I concluded, I offered the wisdom that had become my North Star. True success isn't measured by destroying competitors or accumulating wealth. It's built by creating something of genuine value, treating people with dignity, and maintaining your integrity, even when it costs you in the short term. The empire worth building isn't one that others envy, it's one that makes the world better for having existed. The standing ovation was gratifying, but even more meaningful were the young women who approached afterward, sharing their own stories of being underestimated and asking for advice on navigating male-dominated industries. 3 months later, Michael proposed during a weekend getaway to Door County, Wisconsin. Unlike James's elaborate public proposal at a Michelin-starred restaurant surrounded by strangers, Michael asked the question privately as we watched the sunrise from a lighthouse point, the moment intimate and genuine, like our relationship. "I'm not asking you to be my wife," he clarified as he held out the simple but elegant ring. "I'm asking if we can be partners in building a life together, equal, supportive, and true to ourselves and each other." I said yes without hesitation, certain in a way I never had been with James. This wasn't a fairy tale ending or a strategic alliance. It was a thoughtful choice between two people who had separately built strong foundations and now chose to connect them. With Ethica Fund thriving and expanding globally, I launched my most personal project yet, the Women's Business Incubator, funded entirely by 10% of my personal Ethica Fund shares. The incubator provided not just capital, but comprehensive support to women recovering from professional setbacks or personal crises, especially those leaving financially controlling relationships. The first cohort of 20 women entrepreneurs included former corporate executives, middle-aged women returning to work after divorce, and young innovators who had faced sexual harassment at previous jobs. Watching them support each other while developing their businesses reminded me powerfully of my own darkest days and the community that had helped me survive them. On a crisp autumn morning, 5 years and 10 months after the Waldorf incident, I stood on the balcony of Ethica Fund's headquarters, no longer looking back at the past, but forward to our global expansion. The company had grown beyond my wildest projections, but more importantly, it had stayed true to its founding principles even as it scaled. The empire I had built wasn't just financially successful, it had integrity at its core. The revenge I had once craved had been replaced by something far more satisfying, the knowledge that I had created something meaningful and enduring. My journey from that devastating dinner to successful founder hadn't been about proving James wrong, it had been about proving myself right. And in the process, I had discovered that the best revenge isn't destroying others, but building yourself into the person you were always meant to be. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear that rebuilding is possible even when everything falls apart. Have you ever had to start over after a betrayal or setback? I read every comment and find such strength in this community's stories of resilience. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories about turning pain into purpose and failures into foundations for something greater. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Sometimes the family we choose through shared experiences becomes stronger than the relationships that have hurt us. Until next time, remember that your setbacks might just be setting you up for your greatest comeback.